I sat on the train home, not thinking at all, really, just feeling. And not even thinking about what I was feeling. Only that evening I did begin to address what had happened. The main reason I felt foolish and humiliated was because of, what had I called it to myself only a few days previously, the eternal hopefulness of the human heart. And before that, the attraction of overcoming someone's contempt. I don't think I normally suffer from vanity, but I'd clearly been more afflicted than I realized. What had begun as a determination to obtain property bequeathed to me had morphed into something much larger, something which bore on the whole of my life, on time and memory, and desire. I thought, at some level of my being, I actually thought, that I could go back to the beginning and change things, that I could make the blood flow backwards. I had the vanity to imagine, even if I didn't put it more strongly than this, that I could make Veronica like me again, and that it was important to do so. When she had emailed about closing the circle, I had completely failed to pick the tone as one of sardonic mockery, and taken it as an invitation, almost a come-on. Her attitude towards me, now that I looked at it, had been consistent, not just in recent months, but over however many years. She had found me wanting, had preferred Adrian, and always considered these judgments correct. This was, I now realized, self-evident in every way, philosophical or other. But without understanding my own motives, I had wanted to prove to her, even at this late stage, that she had got me wrong. Or rather, that her initial view of me, when we were learning one another's hearts and bodies, when she approved of some of my books and records, when she liked me enough to take me home, had been correct. I thought I could overcome contempt and turn remorse back into guilt, then be forgiven. I had been tempted somehow by the notion that we could excise most of our separate existences, could cut and splice the magnetic tape on which our lives are recorded, go back to that fork in the path, and take the road less travelled, or rather not travelled at all. Instead, I had just left common sense behind. Old fool, I said to myself, and there's no fool like an old fool. That's what my long-dead mother used to mutter when reading stories in the papers about older men falling for younger women, and throwing up their marriages for a simpering smile, hair that came out of a bottle and a taut pair of tits. Not that she would have put it like that. And I couldn't even offer the excuse of cliché, that I was just doing what other men of my age banally did. No, I was an odder old fool, grafting pathetic hopes of affection onto the least likely recipient in the world. That next week was one of the loneliest of my life. There seemed nothing left to look forward to. I was alone with two voices speaking clearly in my head, Margaret saying, "Tony, you're on your own now," and Veronica saying, "You just don't get it. You never did, and you never will." And knowing that Margaret wouldn't crow if I rang up, knowing that she would happily agree to another of our little lunches, and we could go on exactly as before, made me feel all the lonelier. Who was it who said, the longer we live, the less we understand? Still, as I tend to repeat, I have some instinct for survival, for self-preservation. And believing you have such an instinct is almost as good as actually having it, because it means you act in the same way. So after a while I rallied. I knew I must go back to how I had been before this silly, senile fantasy took hold of me. I must attend to my affairs, whatever they might be, apart from tidying up my flat and running the library at the local hospital. Oh yes, and I could concentrate again on getting back my stuff. "Dear Jack," I wrote, "wonder if you could give me a spot more help with Veronica, afraid I'm finding her just as mystifying as in the old days. Well, do we ever learn? Anyway, the ice floe hasn't melted with regard to my old pal's diary that your mother left me in her will. Any further advice about that? Also, another slight puzzle. I had quite a jolly lunch with V in town the other week. Then she asked me up the Northern Line one afternoon. It seems she wanted to show me some care in the community folk, then got cross when she had done so. Can you shed any light on this one? Trust all's fine with you. Regards, Tony W. I hope the bonhomie didn't ring as false to him as it did to me. Then I wrote to Mr. Gunnell, asking him to act for me in the matter of Mrs. Ford's will. I told him, in confidence, that my recent dealings with the ligator's daughter had suggested a certain instability, and I now thought it best that a fellow professional write to Mrs. Marriott and request a speedy resolution of the issue. I allowed myself a private nostalgic farewell. I thought of Veronica dancing, hair all over her face. I thought of her announcing to her family, "I'm going to walk Tony to his room," whispering to me that I was to sleep the sleep of the wicked, and my promptly wanking into the little basin before she was even downstairs again. I thought of my inner wrist looking shiny, of my shirt sleeve furled to the elbow. Mr. Gunnell wrote to say that he would do as I instructed. Brother Jack never